The siren lights flickered across the old oak posts before I even realized someone had dialed 911 on me. Yes, that's correct. Local officers were pulling into the dirt road leading to my grandfather's ranch at around 7 a.m. Responding to a report of trespassing, my first thought was that maybe a stranger had shown up or a wild animal had gotten onto the property and caused a scare. Never did it cross my mind that the so-called trespasser would be me, standing barefoot by my truck, staring at the swirling red and blue beams bouncing against the morning sky. I had been out there early because the horses needed a fresh bale of hay, and I also wanted to check the fencing along the eastern border where the woods seemed to be splintering. My father had once suggested upgrading it to a sleeker metal version, but that never happened. After he passed, I inherited the place and decided to keep it as Granddad had built it. With rough-hewn posts and old-fashioned barbed wire, this acreage was all I had left of him, besides a few letters tucked into a battered footlocker in the attic. Every sunrise reminded me why he chose this land. With shimmering dew on the grass and a faint gold glow over the rolling fields, I loved the sense of freedom that came with these open spaces. Far from the rules and policies of suburban life, as I walked to the patrol car with my heart pounding, a pair of uniformed officers stepped out. One of them was a tall man with salt and pepper hair who introduced himself as Officer Blake. The other kept looking around as though searching for danger. I could see the apprehension in their eyes, as if someone had phoned in a violent threat. My mind was full of questions. In a calm voice, I asked them how I could help. They told me they'd been dispatched by the local neighborhood association, which claimed that a suspicious person was trespassing on common property. I couldn't hold in a stunned laugh. Common property? My family has owned every inch of this ranch for over half a century. I assured the officers I was the rightful owner, which seemed puzzling to them because they had a different report on file. Officer Blake cleared his throat and read from the dispatch note. It stated that a man was damaging an HOA-maintained fence at 6:45 a.m., and that the suspect refused to leave. The suspect, presumably me, was described as uncooperative and belligerent. Hearing that characterization made my blood pressure spike. I could be many things before my first cup of coffee, but belligerent wasn't one of them. I invited them to check the property records if they needed proof, but I also wanted to know the name of whoever had made the call. They exchanged looks, then mentioned that the complaint came from Crest Haven Meadows, a community association that apparently decided my land fell under their jurisdiction. That was news to me. I escorted the officers behind the barn, pointing to the sagging fence line that separated my domain from the rest of the county. The boards there had my grandfather's initials carved into them, dated decades before any new development cropped up nearby. Over those many years, a suburban sprawl had extended outward, with new houses popping up just beyond the creek. At some point, Crest Haven Meadows had taken root. I never had any official contact with them until a few weeks ago, when I found a white envelope in my mailbox demanding I trim my hedges to meet community standards. I thought it was a silly error or a mistaken address. Now it looked like they were quite determined to pull me into their system, whether I wanted it or not. I could hear another vehicle approaching. A sleek black SUV emerged at the end of my driveway, tinted windows reflecting the rising sun. The driver stepped out in a crisp navy blazer, her hair perfectly coiffed. Even though I had never met her in person, I was almost certain she was the head of that association. Her posture radiated self-importance, and her face wore a perpetual expression of mild disdain. She didn't look like someone who trudged through muddy fields or hammered fence posts on a chilly morning. She marched right over, ignoring my greeting. Without preamble, she announced, "I'm Felicia Morgan, president of Crest Haven Meadows. We have a serious trespassing issue here. I want him removed." Her perfectly manicured hand waved in my direction as if I were a nuisance, not the actual landowner. Officer Blake seemed unsure what to make of this. He looked down at the woman, then back at me, and calmly asked for official documentation that placed my ranch under her authority. She opened her binder and brandished a few papers, claiming them to be updated boundary maps. She explained how their community had expanded some years ago, and according to her records, the land near the old fence line was now part of Crest Haven's greenbelt. I stood my ground, telling her that those supposed expansions never got recorded at the county office, and she should check the official plats from the 1970s if she doubted me. But she appeared convinced of her own narrative, and the officers were stuck in the middle, uncertain about the validity of her claims. I asked them if I could show them the real survey documents stored in my living room. Felicia let out a loud huff and insisted the police had wasted enough time. She demanded they write a citation and instruct me to appear before the HOA board. The older officer said he couldn't do that unless there was actual evidence that I was on property that didn't belong to me. I could almost see Felicia's anger intensifying, her jaw tightening as her carefully groomed composure began to fray. She snapped her binder shut, spun on her heels, and stormed back to the black SUV. She left with a threat to escalate matters. Once she sped away, the officers apologized for the inconvenience, acknowledging they had been dispatched based on her allegations. They left with more confusion than they came in with, but they were polite enough to take copies of my father's old boundary maps. After they were gone, I felt a mixture of relief and fury. This was no innocent mistake. The association had singled me out, perhaps because they had some plan to annex my property or push me into membership. I decided to do some homework. So I headed back inside, removed my dusty boots, and flipped open my laptop. A quick search for Cresthaven Meadows pulled up a glossy website describing it as an upscale residential community with manicured lawns, a private lake, tennis courts, and a clubhouse. At the bottom of the homepage was a link to the association's bylaws, an imposing list of rules that covered everything from mailbox height to approved paint colors. Nowhere did it say anything about farmland or ranches. Every page showcased suburban houses lined up with symmetrical gardens. Definitely not images of barns or fenced pastures. I nearly choked on my morning coffee when I saw how strictly they enforced compliance. There were sections describing fines for everything from leaving a hose out on the driveway to planting the wrong type of flowers in front gardens. It was incomprehensible that any part of my wide-open acreage, dotted with old oaks and horse corrals, would fit into that environment. Then I checked their leadership page, and there she was, Felicia Morgan, pictured in a formal black suit, awarding Community Leader of the Year to herself. Apparently, next to her photo was a short biography bragging about her achievements in beautification initiatives, but I also noticed a mention of developer partnerships, which made me wonder what expansions she'd been orchestrating behind the scenes. That evening, while I was reading through old property records, my phone buzzed. The ID showed an unknown number, which turned out to be Felicia herself. She asked me if I had considered letting her board's official surveyor recheck my fence line. I told her I wasn't interested. She quickly switched tone, claiming it was merely a formality and might spare us future confrontations. The conversation became tense. She talked about how the association had lawyers on retainer and it'd be wise to cooperate. I countered by mentioning I had zero intention of recognizing their authority. She muttered something about how the police clearly failed to do their job that morning, and maybe next time the outcome wouldn't be so pleasant. She hung up before I could respond. The entire exchange felt like a veiled threat. The next afternoon, a notice was taped to my mailbox. It had the Cresthaven logo at the top, followed by a formal directive to remove unauthorized livestock fencing from the community perimeter. It demanded compliance within 14 days, or I'd face daily fines. I tore it up in frustration and tossed the pieces into my truck's passenger seat. I needed advice, so I called my buddy Kyle, who worked in the county registrar's office. We'd grown up together, chasing rabbits around my grandfather's orchard. I explained the situation, and he was as shocked as I was. He confirmed that no official paperwork existed, stating my land fell under Cresthaven's purview. He promised to print me extra copies of the original boundaries, along with updated maps from the county system that would show no recognized expansions had crossed into my ranch. The following morning, I drove into town to pick up those documents. While waiting for Kyle, I overheard two women chatting about that overzealous HOA, complaining that they kept getting cited for minor details like leaving a trash can at the curb for 20 minutes too long. One woman even said she was fed up and wanted to sell her house but feared nobody would buy in a place with such draconian rules. This aligned with what I'd been reading online. There were entire forums devoted to homeowners stuck in endless battles with the group. Some folks joked they should rename it Cresthaven Dictatorship. Still, No one had mentioned farmland. My predicament was apparently unique. When Kyle arrived, he handed me a thick packet of official surveys, deeds, and topographical maps. These documents clearly labeled my acreage as separate from any HOA. He pointed to the lines indicating that the edge of Crest Haven's territory ended well before my creek. That meant Felicia's claims about having jurisdiction over my fence were baseless. The fiasco should have ended there. But I had a sinking suspicion it wouldn't. I asked Kyle if it was possible that the association filed a private annexation or some undisclosed plan. He said that for an entity like that to annex any new area, they'd have to register with the county. There would be public notices, council approvals, and official records. None of that had been done. I thanked him for the clarification and headed home, relieved and determined to put a stop to this nonsense. Sure enough, my phone rang again around 4 p.m. Felicia's voice sounded crisp and almost cheerful this time. She said she wanted to invite me to an upcoming board meeting to resolve our boundary differences, amicably. I told her I was open to hearing them out, but I'd bring all relevant documents proving my rightful ownership. She hesitated, then said, "Yes? Bring whatever you feel you must." The way she paused afterward hinted that she had something else up her sleeve. I replied with a simple, "I'll be there," and ended the call. Later that day, I phoned a local attorney who had a good reputation for property disputes. He told me it wouldn't hurt to have him on standby. I wasn't eager to go legal, but I also didn't want to be railroaded by a well-funded group. The day of the meeting, I arrived at the Crest Haven clubhouse a bit before 6 p.m., wearing my best flannel shirt and jeans, wanting to appear calm but not to be taken lightly. The parking lot was filled with late-model SUVs, and the entire complex seemed meticulously groomed. I noticed neat rows of hedges, shaped like geometric sculptures. Inside, I found a pristine lobby with framed awards, presumably all crowning Felicia's achievements. A board receptionist asked me to wait in a lounge area. I looked around at the motivational posters about community pride and property values. The entire place smelled like potpourri and expensive coffee beans. When they called me into the main hall, I saw a long table where several board members sat. Felicia presided in the center. She greeted me with a superficial smile and gestured for me to sit in a lone chair facing them. It felt a bit like a tribunal. She began with a measured tone, saying how the association regrets any misunderstanding, but that they're simply trying to maintain the common perimeter. One of her colleagues shuffled through a folder and displayed a large map pinned to a corkboard. According to their version, my fence was angled incorrectly, encroaching upon Crest Haven's buffer zone by nearly 15 feet at the southeast corner. They pointed to a red line drawn on this oversized map, claiming that was the official boundary. I calmly placed my own set of documents on the table, pointing out the legitimate county lines. I showed them the discrepancy in the red line, which wasn't recognized by any public authority. A slight murmur went through the board. It was clear, at least a few of them realized something was off. Felicia cleared her throat, looking flustered for the first time. She declared that a new survey from the association's hired firm superseded older records, and that modern developments sometimes require expansions. I asked if any of that had been formally recognized by the county. She responded with a vague statement about pending approvals. Another board member coughed, nervously glancing in her direction, and said that they needed to finalize certain administrative tasks. I gave them a tight smile and stated that, until such expansions were legit, they had no right to barge onto my land or demand I take down my fence. Felicia then switched tactics, accusing me of knowingly undermining community standards, which made it sound as if I were intentionally ignoring beautification rules. I retorted that none of those guidelines applied to me because I'm not part of their group. Two people at the table looked like they wanted to speak up, but Felicia cut them off. She wrapped up by saying they would deliberate and send me written notice of the outcome. It had the air of a monarchy delivering a decree to a subject. I stood, quietly collected my papers, and left. On my way out, I saw a few residents waiting in the lobby, eyeing me with curiosity. Perhaps they'd heard rumors of the renegade rancher. I returned home to find an envelope stuck to my front gate. Another violation notice, but this time it referenced trespass onto HOA, maintained property, and threatened further police involvement if I failed to comply within 5 days. The wording was more aggressive, claiming I had to tear down my fence, move it, or face legal action. My patience had worn thin. I took photos of everything for evidence, sent them to the lawyer, and wrote a stern letter to the board, clarifying that I refused to move my fence an inch without a legitimate county directive. The next morning, at roughly 7 a.m., I saw a crew in reflective vests parked on the side of the road near my property line. They had tripods and measuring tapes, presumably there to produce more so-called evidence of my supposed encroachment. I didn't confront them. Instead, I documented it all with my phone camera. By noon, Felicia was on my porch again. This time, she showed up with a man in a suit who identified himself as the HOA's legal counsel. He started by stating that my fence was a hazard to the common area. He rattled off a litany of code numbers from the association's own regulations. I calmly advised him none of that code held weight on my land. At one point, Felicia tried to slip in a remark about how the farmland's unsightly nature was lowering the property values in Crest Haven. That was an odd statement, considering my ranch had been here longer than any of those cookie-cutter houses, but evidently, she believed a pastoral scene was detrimental to her curated aesthetic. I politely asked them to leave, pointing to the "No Trespassing" sign on my gate. She glared at me with a silent threat in her eyes before marching off, the attorney in tow. I watched their SUV drift away, mindful that this confrontation was nowhere near the end. At around 3 p.m. the following day, I was underneath my old tractor, tightening a loose belt, when a truck from the county assessor's office pulled up. A middle-aged woman with a clipboard approached, looking a bit uncomfortable. She introduced herself as Miss Pennyworth, explaining that she'd gotten a complaint claiming I expanded my structures illegally. I asked who filed it, and she gave a knowing sigh, refusing to say directly. But we both knew Felicia had apparently lodged a formal accusation that I built a shed too close to their border. I invited Miss Pennyworth to take a look if she wanted, gave her my paperwork, and asked if everything was in order. She nodded after checking a few details. There was no violation. "I think someone's trying to give you a hard time," she murmured sympathetically, then left. That evening, I called my lawyer again, detailing the escalation. We agreed to gather all necessary documents for a possible injunction if the association tried anything drastic. Meanwhile, the next morning brought an unexpected twist. I woke at dawn to feed the horses and spotted muddy tire tracks crossing from the subdivided lots into my pasture, leading toward a row of trees near the southwestern corner. It looked like a vehicle had driven onto my field. Then I noticed pieces of caution tape flapping in the breeze, staked randomly around that area. Someone was marking territory. Furious, I made my way over, stepping gingerly in the damp soil, and discovered small orange flags with the Crest Haven logo stuck into the ground. They read, "Community Improvement Project." I nearly lost my temper right there, but held it together long enough to gather them as evidence. This intrusion was beyond a few phone calls or letters. They were physically encroaching. I immediately phoned Kyle, who urged me to document every single flag and track. He was worried the association might claim they had official clearance for some expansion. I spent hours meticulously photographing the footprints, tire ruts, and those branded flags. Then I typed up a report on everything that had happened so far, including dates, times, and witness accounts if any neighbors saw the trucks. Kyle mentioned that sometimes HOAs attempt to create a false sense of inevitability, making it look like a done deal, so the rightful owner concedes out of exasperation. I refused to be worn down. By that evening, I had compiled a binder that would make any detail-oriented bureaucrat proud, but the assault on my nerves continued. Around 6 p.m., Felicia posted an update on the community's social media page, calling me a menace to the serenity of Crest Haven. That was how I discovered the extent of her smear campaign. She described me as an aggressor who verbally harassed her staff and threatened neighbors. Several residents had chimed in, either cheering her on or questioning the legitimacy of her claims. Others seemed confused, unsure why she was picking a fight with farmland outside the recognized boundary. I read the thread, feeling my anger flare up. My lawyer advised me to let her bury herself with baseless accusations, so I did not respond publicly. Instead, I stayed focused on gathering evidence. The next day was quieter, or so I thought, until around 4 p.m. A letter arrived via certified mail, an official-looking document with multiple stamps. It was a notice of hearing scheduled in just 1 week, claiming I needed to attend an HOA special session to address my violations. I nearly laughed out loud. The nerve of that group, summoning me as if they had legal power over my farmland. However, the letter also mentioned they might pursue injunctive relief if I failed to comply. They were using legal language to intimidate me, presumably counting on me not having the means or knowledge to resist. Unbeknownst to them, I had been meticulously preparing for any stunt they pulled. That weekend, I visited the older residents who lived between my property and Crest Haven's boundary. Some of them used to own farmland that got sold to developers over the decades. Their testimonies offered a glimpse into how Felicia and her board had repeatedly pressured them into certain land deals or annexations. 2 neighbors, Doris and Hank, told me that 5 years back, there was talk of building a large community park that would have extended well onto farmland. A massive uproar ensued, culminating in the plan being dropped. The recollections from Doris and Hank included references to under-the-table intimidation. Felicia had apparently told them that if they didn't cooperate, they'd face nuisance, lawsuits. Those details mirrored the intimidation attempts aimed at me. Late Sunday afternoon, I was tidying the barn when an unexpected visitor stopped by. He introduced himself as Martin, a current member of the Crest Haven board. He seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Martin quietly confessed that many board members doubted Felicia's approach. He admitted they had never passed any official resolution to annex farmland, and that she was acting on her own ambitions, possibly hoping to boost the association's profile by swallowing more territory. Felicia might appear more influential or attract bigger development deals. Martin said he felt guilty about staying silent. He handed me a manila folder containing emails in which Felicia bragged about how she'd take advantage of local ignorance to secure new land. She even joked that the county records were easy to manipulate since nobody checked them thoroughly. Those documents were a bombshell that confirmed her dishonest intentions. I thanked Martin, told him I'd keep his identity confidential, and reassured him that I intended to handle this matter legally. With the hearing date approaching, I prepared an organized binder of every incident, every photo, every contradictory statement from Felicia, plus the official county maps. I fully intended to appear at their special session, not because I recognized their authority, but to publicly dismantle Felicia's claims in front of her own board. Meanwhile, my lawyer filed a formal complaint with the county clerk, attaching evidence that Crest Haven was attempting to annex farmland illegally. That process would take time, but it laid the groundwork for potential legal retaliation if needed. The day of the special session arrived. I drove into the Crest Haven clubhouse parking lot around 5 p.m., noticing the place was more crowded than before. People were streaming in, many wearing expressions of unease or curiosity. The meeting was set up in a larger hall this time, with rows of chairs for residents and a raised dais for the board. Felicia sat at the center again, flanked by her supporters. Martin spotted me from the side, but gave no outward sign of familiarity. I found a seat in the front row, my binder clutched in one hand, determined to keep my composure. The attorney from before was standing behind Felicia, whispering in her ear. A hush fell over the room when Felicia banged her gavel, calling the meeting to order. She began with a speech about preserving the community's standards. Halfway through her monologue, she segued into the reason for the emergency session, naming me as the uncooperative occupant of property that she believed belonged, at least partially, to Crest Haven's official perimeter. She used phrases like unlawful fencing and possible violation of local ordinances. She then invited me to present any evidence I might have. The eyes of the residents were on me, some curious, others seemingly hostile. I stepped forward, introduced myself politely, and explained the entire story from my perspective. I detailed how the fence had been here since my grandfather's day, how no official expansions were ever recorded, and how the association's own attempts to relocate boundary markers were illegitimate. Then I produced the county's official maps, the older records, photographs of the orange flags, the trespassing incident, and Martin's emails. I didn't mention him by name. I only said a board member shared them. The emails showed Felicia plotting to unofficially annex farmland to raise the association's profile. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Felicia turned pale. She tried to dismiss the emails as out of context. But several board members looked shocked. One demanded to know if Felicia had forged boundary documents. Another demanded to see the chain of approvals for the expansions she had boasted about. The crowd began murmuring, some angrily. That was the exact moment Felicia lost her grip on the narrative. Residents stood up, peppering her with questions about all the new fines, the rumored developer deals, and if she had manipulated them for her own ends. Felicia insisted she had Cresthaven's best interests in mind, but her composure cracked, and she couldn't produce any legitimate paperwork to counter my evidence. Her face reddened, and she pivoted to personal attacks, calling me a stubborn landowner who refused to compromise. But the damage was done. The once perfectly choreographed show was unraveling. Even her own attorney looked unsure how to salvage the situation. When Felicia accused me of trespassing, I pulled out the copy of the 911 call record that stated she was the one claiming I was on her property. I reiterated that the responding officers had left after finding no grounds for a citation. Felicia tried to talk over me, but one of the board members silenced her, demanding she show actual county approval for an annexation. She could not. Suddenly, the meeting turned into an open forum. Many residents voiced dissatisfaction with Felicia's leadership. While a few loyal supporters tried to defend her, it became clear she had manipulated them as well. This chaos went on for almost 2 hours. By the end, one board member proposed a motion to suspend Felicia, pending a formal investigation into her misuse of authority. That motion passed by a majority vote. She stood up, flustered, and stormed off the dais, her heels clacking loudly on the polished floor. I left the hall that night with a mixture of relief and amazement. Not only had I successfully defended my right to maintain my fence, but I also witnessed Felicia's reign unraveling before a crowd of neighbors who were fed up. Outside, a group of residents apologized to me, saying they had no idea Felicia was doing all this behind their backs. I told them I didn't blame the community itself, but I hoped they would ensure someone like her would never hold such unchecked power again. They nodded vigorously, some exchanging phone numbers with me in case there were future updates. Back at the ranch, I anticipated some form of retaliation from Felicia, who didn't seem like someone to concede gracefully. Sure enough, 3 days later, a tow truck arrived near my property, claiming it needed to remove an unregistered vehicle. The driver quickly realized it was the wrong address or a baseless call, and he left after I showed him my ownership papers. I suspected Felicia had tipped them off with false claims. Then, over the next couple of weeks, random visitors showed up on the boundary road, snapping pictures of my barn or the fence. They never came onto the field, probably for fear of being caught on camera. Meanwhile, the board convened a special investigation committee to review Felicia's conduct. Martin quietly passed me updates. Numerous irregularities in the association's finances were discovered, including suspicious payments to certain surveyors. Felicia had left a sizable paper trail of questionable transactions. Martin said she had apparently tried to buy influence with local officials to push expansions. Once the county discovered these alleged infractions, there was talk of a deeper probe, and so, Felicia became the target of a more thorough inquiry that went beyond my fence issue. She vanished from public view, ignoring repeated requests to attend further board meetings. With Felicia sidelined, the new acting president visited me and apologized on behalf of the entire association. He admitted that the prior boundary dispute was illegitimate and promised no future attempts at absorbing my farmland. He even stated the board would reimburse me for any legal fees I'd accrued. I declined the offer, saying I only wanted them to stay off my property. He understood. We shook hands. That might have been the end of it. But word spread about how Felicia's downfall started with her calling 911 on me for trespassing on my own patch of earth. People found it ridiculously ironic. A cautionary tale about the dangers of letting petty power go to one's head. As for Felicia, rumors circulated that she faced possible legal action for falsifying documents. Some said she fled to another state. Others claimed she was lying low in a relative's guest house, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't much care. My fence was still standing, and my boundary was still mine, recognized by the only authority that mattered, the county's records. In a small gesture of pride, I repainted the fence boards with a fresh coat of deep brown stain and carved my grandfather's initials again, right next to my own. Whenever I pass by that corner, I remember how easily unscrupulous people can try to alter reality if it benefits them. Over the next few months, I built stronger connections with some Crest Haven residents. Surprisingly, a handful of them started visiting my ranch, admiring the horses or offering to help with chores, as if they wanted a taste of genuine country living that strict regulations could never provide. They told me how relieved they felt that Felicia was gone, and how the entire mood in the neighborhood improved. New board members took over who were more interested in community engagement rather than policing small details. Several of those folks thanked me, in their own ways, for standing up to her. I said it wasn't about heroism. I was just protecting what was rightfully mine. The entire ordeal taught me the importance of vigilance. If I had been too passive, Felicia might have manipulated records, or pressured local authorities, until eventually she carved out a swath of farmland for her association. People like that thrive when their targets feel overwhelmed. Standing firm, gathering evidence, and exposing her actions publicly was the only way to stop the encroachment. I wish I could say it was easy, but it wasn't. From those first moments when the patrol car lights danced on my gravel driveway to the chaotic board meeting and Felicia's meltdown, it was a tense journey. However, I take pride in knowing that my family's acreage remains free, as it was always meant to be. On one particularly crisp morning, I caught myself smiling while walking along the fence line. I felt gratitude for the peace that followed all the drama. With the sun peeking over the horizon, I remembered how that same fence once seemed fragile and old, yet it had endured the storms of time and the threat of corporate annexation by an HOA I never consented to. I bent down to adjust a barbed wire staple, thinking of how Grandpa hammered the original nails. He always said each post was like a sentinel, standing guard over our independence. His wisdom felt more relevant than ever. A few weeks later, out of the blue, I received a letter from an attorney representing Felicia. It alleged defamation and emotional distress. It claimed I tarnished her reputation. My lawyer read the document, rolled his eyes, and recommended we ignore it unless she actually filed a lawsuit. Most likely, it was an empty threat. She had no standing to accuse me of anything after everything she'd done. That final echo of Felicia's attempt to maintain control swiftly dissolved. The hush that settled afterward signaled the true end of her meddling. She had lost not just credibility, but also her hold on the community. No press conference or apology could bring her back to a position of influence. In time, Crest Haven Meadows appointed a new president who invited me to attend a barbecue they held at the community park. I decided to stop by, partly out of curiosity. I was greeted warmly. People recognized me as the ranch guy or the fence man, as if I were a local legend. Amid the kids playing on the grass and older folks cooking hot dogs, I realized that most of these residents didn't wish for conflict. They just wanted a pleasant environment without a tyrant. We chatted about small topics, the weather, upcoming neighborhood events, and nobody mentioned boundary disputes. One older gentleman asked if my fence needed further repairs. I told him I had replaced a few boards and planned to keep it sturdy, as long as I could swing a hammer. He nodded approvingly. After that casual get-together, I drove home at around 7 p.m., the sky awash in a pink and orange glow. My thoughts wandered to how precarious property rights can become if someone with enough audacity decides to push their luck. Yet, at the same time, the American tradition of standing one's ground remains strong. Felicia misjudged me. She assumed she could bulldoze her way in, brand me a trespasser on my own soil, and expect the authorities to believe it. But reality eventually caught up with her. The entire episode felt surreal, but it validated what Grandpa always taught me. Our bond with the land is worth safeguarding, even when the odds appear stacked against us. Soon after, the county office concluded their investigation into Felicia's expansions. I heard from Kyle that some of Felicia's dealings were flagged for potential fraud. It might still lead to formal charges, but that's not my concern. My biggest worry these days is making sure the horses get enough water during the hot spells and that the fence remains in decent shape. Life is calmer now. I resume my routine of waking at 5 a.m., walking Dusty, my best horse, to the corner of the pasture, watching the sunrise. Sometimes I see the rooftops of Crest Haven in the distance, but it's comforting to know their lines end far short of my family's boundary. Whenever I recall that morning when the police arrived, their lights painting my tree line with color, I smile at the absurdity of it. The day the association dialed 911 because they believed I was trespassing in my own yard stands as a testament to overreach. They wanted me to bend, but I didn't. They tried to scare me with legal jargon, but they failed. They hoped to claim a piece of farmland that never belonged to them, but they got caught red-handed. I share the story with anyone who wonders if it's possible to resist an overbearing group that threatens your property. The answer is yes. Provided you have truth and evidence on your side, people with unwavering determination can accomplish a great deal, especially when defending something dear. Whether it's land inherited from loved ones or the principle of self-reliance, I still think about Felicia occasionally, mostly with pity. She had apparently devoted a lot of energy to controlling every aspect of that neighborhood, to the point she believed she could rewrite official boundaries. I guess that's what happens when someone starts believing their own exaggerations. Reality eventually becomes a rude awakening. I don't harbor hate for her. I just hope she understands that a person's home or ranch isn't a mere piece of territory to be gobbled up in the name of beautification. It's a life investment, a piece of family history, a place of solace. One evening, I walked along the creek that outlines part of my southwestern border. The reflection of the moon on the water was brilliant, and the night air felt crisp. I remembered every conversation with the police, every notice slapped on my gate, every tense meeting in that clubhouse. It all felt distant, like a tale from the past. My new neighbors from Crest Haven have proven themselves friendly, wanting nothing more than to maintain a peaceful existence. Sometimes they even ask if they can bring their kids over to pet the horses. I oblige when my schedule allows. The children laugh as they feed Dusty carrots, their eyes bright with excitement. If you ask me, that's how neighbors should be: cooperative, respectful, without pointless regulations or intimidation. The story spread beyond our county. A local blogger wrote a piece titled, "HOA Calls 911 on Ranch Owner Turns Out He's Not Even in Their HOA." It circulated on social media for a while, and people commented with similar tales of overzealous boards. Some readers expressed horror, others found comedic relief in the irony. Many pointed out that not all associations are bad, but the threat of letting power go unchecked is real. The piece ended with the line, "Sometimes, a determined individual can halt an overreach if he stands tall on firm ground." I liked that quote. It reminded me of how any one of us can make a difference by defending what's right, especially when it's personal property that's been a part of the family for generations. At around 8 p.m. on a warm Friday night, I decided to tidy up the living room, rummaging through old boxes, and stumbled upon Grandpa's notebook from decades ago. He had sketched the layout of his farmland and scrawled notes about the best spots for planting vegetables, the location of underground springs, and the corners where he intended to install robust fence posts. His slanted handwriting carried a sense of purpose, an unspoken assurance that this place would remain in the family. It struck me how this same fence line that he planned so long ago nearly became the center of a tug-of-war between me and Felicia, yet the posts remained, unwavering in the soil, as if telling the world they wouldn't move for anyone's convenience. At times, I think about how quickly a quiet life can shift into a heated conflict. One day you're sipping coffee at sunrise, admiring the orchard, and the next you have a neighborhood organization calling 911 on you for stepping onto your own land. The transformation from peace to chaos can happen in a snap when certain personalities crave dominance. But that's also why it's so critical for people to be vigilant. If I'd ignored her initial letters, if I'd thrown them in the trash and hoped the problem would vanish, Felicia might have advanced further, convincing local officials my fence was truly in her domain. Once a false story takes hold, it becomes harder to correct. By facing her actions head-on, I unmasked her illusions quickly. I recall one afternoon, After the fiasco had mostly subsided, a group of kids from Cresthaven was riding bikes near the boundary. They stopped to watch me rake leaves under a canopy of aged oaks. None of them seemed concerned about territory lines or association rules. They were just excited to see farmland so close to their houses. One boy asked if I ever let people go fishing in my creek. I told him that if his parents said it was okay, and they asked me politely, maybe we could arrange a day for that. The kids grinned like it was the best news of the week. It occurred to me that, minus the controlling influence of a certain board president, the families living just beyond my fence might have been good neighbors all along. As the sun dipped low that evening, I realized that bridging differences often requires clearing away the negativity spread by divisive leaders. I suspect Felicia used fear and intimidation to keep folks in line. Once she was gone, they could be themselves regular families who appreciate a bit of rural space. There's a kind of poetic justice in that. Her entire grand plan to expand the association's boundary ended up forging a closer connection between me and those residents, but not in the way she intended. Instead of forcibly annexing farmland, the community discovered the value of mutual respect and honest dialogue. Now, whenever someone asks if I still deal with that neighborhood group, I say, we coexist just fine. They stay on their side. I stay on mine. And sometimes we wave hello. It's a far cry from the hostility that filled my driveway the morning the cops arrived. Even Officer Blake swung by a while later to check how things had turned out. Expressing satisfaction that everything calmed down, he recalled how unusual it was to see an organization so vehement in their demands that an owner leave his own property. I assured him I appreciated how he handled the situation with fairness. Without his initial neutrality, Felicia might have convinced law enforcement I was in the wrong. Ultimately, that entire ordeal left me with a deeper sense of gratitude. It reminded me that the freedoms we sometimes take for granted can be threatened at any moment. My farmland, with all its quirks and imperfections, was almost dragged into the clutches of an association that had no business claiming it. By standing firm, using the official records, enlisting the county's help, and confronting the board directly, I managed to hold on to this piece of heritage. Now, each crisp dawn is sweeter, each chore feels more purposeful. Even that old fence, which once felt like a plain boundary, has become a symbol of perseverance and a testament to how a determined individual can stop an overreach in its tracks. When folks retell the story, they often focus on the comedic image of the police arriving to arrest me for trespassing on my own ranch. They imagine me in dusty jeans, pitchfork in hand, looking baffled at the swirling lights. That moment sums up the entire fiasco. A farcical scenario that reveals the absurdity of Felicia's attempts to rewrite boundaries. It underscores just how far some individuals will go to impose their will on others. But it also highlights that there's always a path to victory when armed with truth, patience, and an unwillingness to roll over. I hope that's the main lesson people remember. Tomorrow, I plan to repaint the big wooden welcome sign that marks my driveway entrance. It's old and faded. I'm thinking of adding the phrase, free range. Free spirits in bold letters. It's a small nod to the fiasco we endured. Some might think it's a reference to the horses. But for me, it's a reminder that this land remains ours, unchained by extraneous regulations. Those who visit will know they've stepped into a spot free from the suffocating grip of overreaching neighborhood rules. And if anyone ever again tries to claim my land as part of their association, well, they can read the sign and keep walking. This ranch stands independent, just like it did in my grandfather's day, and I intend to ensure it stays that way. I can't say I miss the drama, but I'm grateful that it exposed something crucial. People need to be informed about their rights, land boundaries, and official records. Too often, unscrupulous individuals bank on ignorance to push their agendas. If my story resonates with anyone else going through an HOA nightmare, they can take comfort in the fact that as long as you remain steadfast and gather evidence, you hold a real chance at prevailing. The memory of Felicia's frantic face at that board meeting, her voice cracking under the weight of irrefutable proof, lingers in my mind as a testament to that truth. Ultimately, the illusions she spun collapsed, leaving the rightful ownership intact, and sending a clear message to anyone who might try the same stunt in the future. If I hear another report about an association calling 911 on a homeowner, I'll probably shake my head and recall my own morning shock. Sometimes life hands us bizarre episodes that test our resolve. Mine came in the shape of a black SUV, a woman with a perfect blazer, and a misguided belief that farmland could simply be folded into a neat suburban plan. She was wrong. I proved it. The community recognized it, and the final resolution speaks for itself. Now, I can walk along those aged wooden fence posts, each hammered in by my family, and feel an unbroken bond with the earth beneath my boots. That quiet triumph is the best reward of all.